stuff. Ignore the projector for whatever reason not playing nice today. Up here, it's kind of like squished. Trust me that it is perfectly round as I drew it, okay? The video will have it round. I think it's probably more important than seeing it on the projector round. So first step obviously is Illustrator. Do not go into After Effects until I have seen all three of your Illustrator drawings of interfaces and approved and made sure that you had good ones. You're only picking one, but I want to see three of them in Illustrator. So don't go into After Effects until you have all three of them. Once you have them, they're all labeled. So every single one of my layers is labeled. So I can see exactly what makes sense. I've also kind of grouped things together that make more sense being together. Like I mentioned before, these bars here, each of these dark blue bars is on a separate layer. But the bar here is on, the background of it is all on one layer because that's not going to move independently. The individual bars will move independently, okay? Same thing with this stuff on here. If I click on this and go to that layer, this is just that whole strip of things. I didn't individually put each one of those on a separate layer because that's just another element that's on there. It's not really going to do anything except for just kind of like be a ground for some of my pieces. Same thing with this. This is all one area here. Okay, and then the same thing with my rulers at the top. Those are all just rulers at the top. All right, so I save it just like we've done before. I go into After Effects. At this point, I should make sure I save it into the right spot. 1900, hologram. I'm going to save this into my artwork folder. If you name them UI 1, 2, 3, we'll have to make sure that when we go into After Effects, we click a button or make sure a button isn't clicked. All right, so now I'm in After Effects. I'm going to open up my hologram. Nope, I'm just opening my file right now. So this is my hologram 1. I'm just going to delete the stuff that I have inside here. Oh, cancel this, delete. No compositions, there we go. So nice and clean, okay? This is, remember we had the template folder. I copied the template folder. I opened that up so that I have all of my folders nice and organized here so I don't get docked points for not having stuff organized. So now I can go and double click, go and find my artwork. Make sure it goes into the right folder here, there. Oops. Okay, so on this, same thing, composition, retain layer size. If I label these UI1, UI2, UI3, After Effects will think that this is actually not one piece of artwork. It'll think it's an animation because it sees the 1, 2, 3 and it thinks that it's a sequence of moving pieces. So if you did that, just make sure that this is unchecked, okay? You'll see it when you open it up and obviously it doesn't look right. So I can import. And then I can verify that my settings are correct here, 960 by 540, 30 frames per second. It's 2 minutes long. That's fine. I can adjust that after. I double click. I can again verify that everything is still looking the way it should. In Illustrator, my items here were black. So when I come into After Effects, you don't see them because they're black. Okay, that's not a big deal. I'm going to color all my stuff inside of After Effects. That way I have a little bit more freedom to do it here versus having to always jump back to Illustrator and go that way. Just so I can see my stuff, I'm going to go to my comp settings. I'm going to make this gray. There we go. A little bit darker. And then I'm going to start to look at some of the items that I may want to group together, okay? And just start looking at that. So at the very, very bottom here, I have my background cross and my 2 rulers. So these 3 things will typically be always together. I'm not going to separate them. They're just going to be always together. The rulers may move independently, but the background crosses are going to stay pretty much in the same spot. And if I turn those off, you can see exactly what those are. Okay. I also have these black squares here. those there I probably also want to keep as flat things. So I'm imagining this as having like a base. Like imagine having a flat surface. Everything will rise up off the flat surface. That would be like more of a 3D thing that would be more interactive. There's no point in having these things rise up off the top of it if they're not going to be interactive. So that will also be part of that base area. So if I go into here and I find those, top right corner, yep, bottom right corner, bottom left corner, and top left corner. I'm going to pull all of these down to the bottom so they're all in about the same area. I also have those background levels. Those are pretty much going to stay in the same spot. And I also have all of these strips here. Okay, so thin strips to thick strips. I'm going to scoot those down there. All right, what's background levels? Oh, that's just the background. Okay, so I need that there too. There we go. So all of those are together. So I can add more stuff to this after I get through it. And I start to realize, oh, I do want to add this, I do want to add that. Because all of these are going to be in the same area, the same plane, I'm going to pre-compose them into their own little composition so I can focus just on them and focus just on what they're doing. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-C while those are selected. I'm going to say base items. And now if I double-click this, I have one composition that just has these base items exactly where I need them to be. Okay. If I add more stuff to this, let's say that I wanted to add these stripe bars here, I'll find those stripe bars. There it is. Sidebar, nope. Top there, left, there, and there. So I can just take these and just Control-X to cut them, go into the base items, Control-V to paste them, and they'll be in that exact same spot. Okay? So any items that I'm using as grounding items, I put into this composition. All of these will not lift up. They will not move. They will just kind of sit there. They may move left and right. They may move like up and down. But as far as their location, it's basically going to be just a flat plane of all of these items together. Cool. I'm going to hide some of these as I start to work. So the green ones, I'm just going to hide that. I don't need that one at the moment, or that one. Okay, I'm going to turn off this bottom one just so I can kind of focus on what is still left. These items here, I may take this item. I think I'll probably take all of these items here. The majority of this, I kind of planned on it to just be all the rings basically moving out, in 3D. Yeah, and spinning. That's my right bar. Yep, so all of that, stripe right bar. Yep, so I'm going to, if I want to take that box, I want to keep that there. Yeah, I'll bring that out. Okay, so I'm going to cut these things, drop this into here too. All right, so now I pretty much have the things that I would keep separated in that other composition. So that's all the flat stuff. Everything that's going to be here is going to be 3D and moving up and down. So I'm going to jump to my base items here, and the order doesn't matter. I could do the other stuff first, I could do this stuff first, I can do them pretty much at any time. I'm going to go through and start animating some of the things that I may want to animate. Like I mentioned before, these bars, I do want them to kind of fluctuate and move up and down a little bit. What I don't want to do is have to do this manually. Number one, if I, scaled this, you can see it's going to scale obviously from there. So how do I get it to not scale from the middle? Yep, move the anchor point. So I'm going to hit Y, move it to the bottom. There we go. And then now when I scale this, it does that. Okay. Now I don't want to animate this manually, doing, setting a keyframe here, setting a keyframe there, setting a keyframe here. We talked before about using expressions to be able to drive stuff without us having to do a lot of work. Okay. And so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go to my thick strip 1, which is that far left one. I'm going to go to my scale, And then I'm going to write an expression here. Now, just so we can see this, I'm going to copy it into WordPad once I start typing it. So I hold down Alt, and I click on it. And then this would give me the full thing, okay? So basically what this expression is doing, maybe I can zoom in, I can't zoom in. There we go. This right here, when I hit Alt and I click on that stopwatch, it automatically puts this expression in. This expression says, whatever your scale currently is, that's going to be the value. So if I set my scale to 150, it'd be 150. If I set it to 12, it would be 12. I don't want to do that. What I need to do is be able to add a wiggle to this. So if I just go wiggle 2 times a second and make it a range of 100 pixels, or 100%, as I paste that in here, I get this. Okay, so I've set 0 keyframes, but I've gotten that. Now what's the issue that we're seeing here? Yep, so it's going above that bar. It's also scaling inward. I don't want it to scale inward, number 1, and then obviously number 2, it's going above it, okay? So what I need to do is I need to be able to break off the X and the Y. I need to write one expression for the Y direction, and the X, I just want to stay exactly where it was, okay? So when we look at anything like that, typically we have like 2 values that we're playing with. So these are regular parentheses, right, the curly ones, or the rounded ones. These are brackets. Anytime we have 2 values, we put them into brackets. And the brackets is like value 1, value 2, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm going to make this kind of obvious of what this would be, okay? So essentially that's what I want to do, right? The X will say exactly what the X is going to be, and the Y is the only one that will wiggle, okay? So that would give us the X being what X is and the Y being this wiggly thing. Now it's a little bit more complicated because it doesn't know what X is, okay? As far as the software knows, X is just a random number. And then this wiggle actually has a lot more information inside it than just one value that's moving up and down. So if you're familiar with programming at all, you've heard of variables. Basically, they're just buckets we can store values in and then use those values later. So I'm going to say scale Y equals wiggle da, 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 and that will be good, okay? So instead of having this down here, I'm going to put scale Y, okay? Now to get the value of X, I have to tell After Effects that I want to grab just the value of X. Luckily for us, we have, stop playing, we have this pick whip. So if I delete my expression, I'm going to Alt-click again, and I drag the pick whip to this first value, it'll show me exactly what Y is doing, okay, or what X is doing, because of what I grabbed. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it here. So this is what the pick whip does. And let me get some more spaces in here. Get some room. There we go. So first it creates a variable, and then it's storing the transform.scale, and then you'll see another bracket with a 0 here. In programming language, this is called an array, and the brackets are ways to define different parts of the array, okay? So value 0 is actually the first digit. So this is value 0. Guess what scale Y would be if we were to call on that one? 1. Okay? So there's 2 values here. It starts off 0 and then 1. And then if we had a Z, what would that be? 2, right? So it starts off at 0. If you can remember that, it's no big deal. So this is giving us our translate X. And then this is giving us our scale X, and that's giving our scale Y. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rename this. I'm going to just say scale X equals this. Okay, and also if you've never used expressions before or programming, it is, the words have to be spelled exactly the same. They have to be typed out exactly the same. If I put a lowercase x here, it may not work. Even though they're spelled the same, one being capital and one not changes how it reads it. So make sure everything is spelled correctly. So this should, there we go. This should give us our value. We'll see. Okay, so I pasted it in there, and it looks like it's working. I hit play. Now it's only moving the Y direction. It's not moving the X direction at all. Okay, now it still will probably go above it. I think I just saw it go above before. Oh, you're getting so close. There it goes. Okay, so it definitely does go above it. And this is one of the advantages of expressions, is that all we have to do is just change this number here. This is how many times per second it's getting a new number. And then this is how wide of a range it's kind of picking that number. So if we set it to 2, twice a second it's going to grab different numbers. Okay. If I set this to 50, let's copy this again, paste it. Right, so now it's wiggling, it's just not going above it. Perfect. Okay, so now what would I change if I wanted this to go faster? The 2, right? So bigger or smaller? Bigger, right? So that's how many times per second it's going to move. Okay, now here's where the advantage of this comes in, because we can really adjust all of these settings really quickly. So if I want to go slower, it's just simply typing in a number. It's not going back and editing a whole bunch of keyframes. Now, one thing that I kind of threw in here that I didn't show is this. This extra 0 right here is calling on that wiggle's first value. So when you do anything like a wiggle, it gives you several values in return, and we want to pick just the first one. So that's what that 0 is telling us to do. If I didn't have this 0 here, it would give me an error saying it doesn't know which one of the wiggle values you want to use for scale Y. So I'm going to set this back to, let's say, 1. Oops, I didn't copy and paste it. Cool. All right, so now I have this expression. Look at how easy this is now to animate all the other ones. If I go to the scale here, the scale there, I paste the expression. Oops, I didn't move their anchor point, so that's something I should have done before I did anything like that. So I just undid the expression. I'm going to move the anchor point. And then Alt-click that again, and then paste, Alt-click, paste. Now it's probably going to go above them. They started off at higher values. That's not a big deal, because again, I can change where their starting point is. Okay, so I'm just going to say, instead of this being 50, maybe it's 30. And then on this one, maybe it's 20. Nope, they're still going above it. So we'll set that one to 10, and we'll set this one to 5. He still scoots above it. Which one are you? Number 2? Nope, you're number 2. Okay. Now the other thing I can do, let me copy this expression so we can use this, is I can use basic math in order to control what this value is. So if this is starting off already like this big, and no matter what I do, I put in 10 and it's going like crazy high up, what could I do to make this number that's already like 100 to 150, what could I do to make it smaller? There's 4 basic math functions that you learn in like 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. What is it? divide it, right? So if I just took the number that's 100 and I just divided it by 2, what's my new number? 50, right? So if I just take this and just put a divided by, oops, not 50, divided by 2 here, now you'll see how it just jumps down to that smaller value. I could have also subtracted. I could have said subtract 20 from it. Now that might cause an issue because let's say that it goes from 0 to 100. When it gets down to 15, what's it going to do when it gets to 15? It's going to go below, it's going to be -5, right? So dividing it is perfect because it'll typically always be in the positive range, and then it's just going to cut it in half or cut it into whatever value. Okay, and now because I've done that, maybe I want to give this a little bit more of a value here. So let's just see. Oops. That way it'll give me a little bit more room for it to kind of move around. Maybe it'll go down further and come up higher. All right, that's cool. The other one seems to be doing fine. I maybe want to have that one move a little bit more because it's not moving as much. So I'll just set that to 2. Or maybe 4. The idea with any of these is you don't want it to be distracting. When you have stuff moving on the screen, you don't want to have 50 things all moving at the same time, some fast, some slow. It's like too much. You want it to be very controlled and have an actual purpose for why it's doing what it's doing. Okay, so dividing it by 2 does exactly that. It cuts the number in half. Let's say that I wanted to not divide it by 2. What's another thing that I could do? I already said one of them. Subtract, right? We could also multiply it times something that would make it smaller. How do we multiply something to make it smaller? 0.5, right? So that's the exact same thing as dividing it by 2. I typically go this route because it's a lot easier for me to say times 0.9. And it'll like multiply it times 0.9, and that way it doesn't go as low. It'll kind of like stay in that realm, or by 0.2. Okay, so it all depends on your own preference as to how that works. Cool. So that's those ones. Okay, now let's go to the thin strips. Okay, and we have the same thing here. I'm going to grab all the thin strips. You can see where their pivots are. I definitely need to adjust where those are at. I could delete all these, keep one of those, and just duplicate it over and just scoot it. That would work too. But in case I want to change something in Illustrator, I shouldn't do that. So I'm just going to grab each one of these, move their pivot down. I don't need to worry about the left and right position of their pivot. It could be way over here, as long as it's still level with that bottom line. Because it's not scaling it in the X direction, it's just scaling it in the Y direction. Okay, so there's all my thin strips. So now let's do one of these the same way. So I'm going to copy this one and just paste it. As an animator, a motion graphics person, if you find something like this that you're like, hey, I may use that script later, I typically will copy this and I will paste it into a Word document that says, here's an expression for After Effects, here's what it does, and then I can just grab this later and use it. Okay? Obviously in class I want to show you how I come up with it from scratch. Cool. So I'm going to watch just that first strip and see, yep, that's doing a pretty good job there. Okay? All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my next one. Now instead of writing that exact same expression, what I'm going to do is I'm going to Alt-click on this, and then I'm going to pick whip the previous one. Okay, now what that should do is make them equal. Because they started off at different sizes, this one's 100%, this one's 100%. So as this one scoots down to 50%, this one will scoot down to 50%. As this one scoots up to 200, this one will scoot up to 200. Okay? So if we watch them, you'll see how they kind of work in sync. There they go. Versus the other ones that were kind of like off a bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply this times 0.9. Okay? So what that should do is it should give me a little bit of offset in there too. Okay, so it's not going to match perfectly what that one was. Maybe I want to add something else in there just to give it a little bit more. No, I'll keep it simple. I'll just keep that simple. All right. So then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to drag it to this one for the next one, then multiply that times 0.9. Now you'll notice that as I start doing these, the expression for it is getting a little bit more complicated as I start referencing other layers. If you understand the syntax, you can use this to your advantage to grab pretty much anything without having to use the pick whip. So where it says this comp.layer, obviously it's going into this composition and it's grabbing the layer called thinstrips_06. And it's grabbing its transform scale and multiplying it times 0.9. Okay, so that's all it's doing. So if I go to the next one, Alt-click, I can pretty much paste this and just change the number from 6 to 5. And that would, oops, as long as I don't hit enter, that would, it should work. Unless I also have a typo there where I called it this strips, which I should just correct that right here. There we go. And then I alt-click this, I paste the expression, I change this to 4. And again, as long as I've typed it correctly, it should be fine. This will be 3. And that will be 2. Oops. Again, stop doing that. Okay. So now as I watch this, I can see very simply what it's doing. Now, as we get to the end of this, what's the issue? Right. So as I'm multiplying them times 0.2, it's also going 0.2 this way, right? So I have to correct that. So I'm just going to undo all my expressions that I wrote. There we go. And then I'm going to do another Alt-click. I'm going to go X and Y. Okay. Now, as I pick whipped each one separately, this is going to give me a mess. I'm going to fix it. Okay, so let me make another word pad here. So this is what it looks like. So it says temp, so it makes the variable. This comp.layer thin strip scale blah 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 is that. And then it has this temp, and then it has this other random thing here. Okay, so this is where we have to understand what the syntax is to be able to make it work correctly. So in the last one I did scale X equals that. And then I'm just going to do scale Y will equal number 1. Then I'll say scale X, scale Y. So now as I paste that, it should paste correctly so that it's only affecting the Y direction and not the X direction. Okay, because this one's X doesn't move, that one's X shouldn't move either. And then I can just go into my word pad and then multiply that times 0.9. Okay, now I could also multiply it times anything, right? So if I said multiply it times wiggle, 2 times a second, 10, and then multiply that times 0.2, let's say. We'll just see what happens with that one. And we get an error. Oops. I have to tell it to use the first value of the wiggle. And there we go. Okay, so that obviously messed everything up. What did I do? This comp. Oops, I copied the wrong expression because I was in the wrong one. Yep. 10. Grab the first value of it times 0.2. There we go. I grabbed the totally wrong expression. I grabbed the first one we were using, and now we get this. Okay, now sometimes your expressions will not work out. Obviously here, even though I multiplied it times 0.2 and I did all this other stuff, it's actually like 1,000 is what it's scaled that value to. So it's like really far up there. So I'm just going to do that, and that should bring it down to an even smaller number. Make sure I copy the right one. Okay, so now it's at 11.5. Okay, now I could, again, just kind of go in and do my own value. I could just make my own wiggle like I did before and tweak some of those settings on there. It doesn't matter. The point is to give you the exposure so you see how these things we can tweak them. Now this is not very friendly for me to copy and paste because now I have to go into, let's say this, and change this 0 and 7 to 0, 6 for the next one and the next one and the next one. It's much easier if I just said, hey, the layer above this, that's the one I want to copy from. And After Effects allows us to do that. After Effects, Expressions. And there's a bunch of websites, but I wanted to jump specifically to the ones that are talking about using the index expression. Okay? So I'm going to jump down to here. And you can see if I go to index -1, what that's going to do, you can read through this, is it's going to say whatever layer I'm on, that's the index. And if I say -1, it's going to go to the layer above it. So if I just said, hey, grab the layer above its value, then I basically have a universal expression that I can just copy and paste without having to set up anything else. Okay? So I'm going to go to After Effects again. And I'm going to put scale x equals index -1. And this is where my, if this will open, this is where having expressions on hand helps. What? I didn't spell anything wrong, I just crashed. P drive, expressions, AE expressions. Okay, so that's something else. I need to use that one. I'll grab things. I don't have it in this drive. That's fine. All right. Let me just get the syntax right and then it'll work. What's my error? Expression disabled. So if you type something wrong, you get this triangle and it'll tell you what's wrong. So it says scale of layer 11 thin strips 06 in comp base items. Layer is not a function. So I typed in layer here. Oops. I'll type index.1. No. All right. No, that's only after you have another line there. So what am I typing wrong? Index -1. That should work. It doesn't like me. This is my only gripe with After Effects is that they changed some of their expression writing from one version to the next. This comp.layer, that's what I forgot to do. This comp layer. Oops, not or not quotation marks, just index. Okay, and then I can say dot scale. There we go. Okay, so now this references the layer above its scale. Okay, so this comp dot layer parenthesis index -1 dot scale, that's what I use to reference the layer above it. If I do that, it'll reference just the x of it. If I do that, it'll just reference the y. Okay, so I'm going to say scale, oh my god, equals that 0. Scale y equals this going to 1. And then I have to tell it, these are the actual values I want you to use. So I could put scale x for both these, scale y for both of those. It has to know which ones I want to do. Okay, so that should work. Good. Okay, so now I can take this and just times it by 0.25 or something. Cool. So now as I hit play, I can see that that second one is moving just in the y direction, and it's keeping it pretty low. All right, now I can take this and copy it, alt-click on the next one, paste it, alt-click on the next one, paste it, alt-click on the next one, paste it. It's showing this and giving me a refresh disabled because it sees that I'm kind of doing a bunch of stuff at the same time. So it's saying I'm not going to even try to update this until you're fully done typing expressions. There we go. Okay. Now everything is really small because the first one I did, I multiply it times 0.25. The second one I did, times 0.25. The second one I did, times 0.25. So they're gradually getting smaller. So here's what's awesome about this is that all I have to do is go to the first one, and let's say I multiply it times 0.85. Now all the other ones are getting bigger because the first one is getting bigger. And then I have to grab all of these. Now this can be a hassle because now I have to go into each one of these and repaste this expression. There we go. Okay, maybe I don't want this one divided by 2. I'll just leave it like it is. There we go. And now you can see how they're all kind of like relying on each other. As the first one moves up really big, the next one's moving like the same kind of movement to it. It's still too much though, right? Times 0.9. There we go. I like that. Oh, too big. All right, I'll be satisfied with that. That works. Okay. Now the other thing that I could do is I could have also used a track mat or something to cut off the thing. So basically it's like stuck inside there. So even if it does go above it, who cares? It just kind of hits the top and then that's it. Cool, so that's that one. These ones here, I'm not really sure what I want to do with them fully. I may want them just kind of glimmer, so have kind of like a coloration that goes across them. I may even pre-compose these and say striped bars. And that way, if I did an effect on them, like generate gradient, where are you at? Not 4-color gradient, regular one, there you are. So radial ramp, let's see what that looks like. Red. And these are placeholder colors. I will come back and change the colors later. I'm just trying to get a feel for what this would look like with some colors on there. Maybe do some ramp scatter on this. That'll give me a little bit of noise in there. Okay, I'm overdoing it just so you can see it. Yeah, you can see that. Yeah, okay. And then what I can do is I can take the start of this ramp and I can move it. So here's the start. So if I move this here or there, you'll see it's going to kind of radiate from the center of that. And if I go to the end, which is down here, this will again control how far out that's going. So it might be kind of neat if I just kind of moved this closer and further away, right? So if I basically just move this thing up and down, like closer to that center point, then it would be like really cool. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to hit undo. I'm going to look at this and say, okay, this is going to go from 482 to 276. I'm going to click on the, rewind this, click on the end ramp. So I have a keyframe at the end of the ramp. I'm going to go up to, I want this to be pretty subtle, so I would go up to like 8 seconds or so. Pull this down. So now I've got some pink in there. If I look at my keyframes, you can see I have 2, so that now it animates like this. Okay, and then I'm going to go up to, let's say, here, and I'll pull it back to the beginning. Okay, so now I have this. Comes in and gets redder and goes back to blue. Now again, we could utilize expressions to help this process go. So After Effects, Expressions, Loop. And what this will do is it'll actually take and allow us to take an animation and loop that animation over and over and over again, so that we don't have to worry about, again, doing stuff the manual way. Well, I know it's called loop out. Let me just type that in. Okay, so here's loop out. And what it's doing is it's looping that expression. It's going from the start to the end, start to the end. This is what ping pong does. It goes from the start to the end, automatically will go back to the start, and then automatically will go back to the end. So it will go ping pong back and forth. So here he has 2 keyframes, one here, one there. Just by typing in loop out, it just jumps back to the beginning. By using this thing that says ping pong, it'll automatically reset itself. So it's basically going to fluctuate between the start and the end keyframes. So I'm going to delete this extra keyframe because we don't need it. Even though we have a keyframes on this, I can still alt-click it and type in an expression. Yeah. Yep. Ping. I just had to make sure I got the caps right. Ping pong. Okay, so now I hit play. I'm going to bring these closer together so it's a lot more obvious. So we have to wait 15 seconds to see this. All right, I'm going to bring it even closer so we can see this. 2 seconds. It's still going like really slow. There we go. Okay, so now I don't have to worry about setting a bunch of keyframes for this. I have basically 2 keyframes that are controlling this. And if my boss comes over and says those are moving too quick, all I have to do is take this and move it further apart. Now it's going to go slower. I don't have a million keyframes I need to tweak, just these 2. Okay, now just so you can see what it would do without this ping pong in there. So you can see how it goes up to that pink and then just jumps back to the blue. Goes up to the pink, jumps back to the blue. Boop. Okay, with the ping pong in there, it's just a nice little like glowing kind of thing. All right, so that's cool. I like that. All right, so I'm going to leave that as is. I'll come back to this, to that stuff later. Ruler top and ruler bottom. I'm going to go under here. I think under one of these areas, there's an offset. Okay, as you get familiar with Photoshop and After Effects, you'll find that sometimes this effects and presets is easier to search for stuff. So if I just go in here and I know that offset is a Photoshop command, a lot of Photoshop stuff is inside of After Effects. I'm going to use this offset. I'm going to drag this down to my ruler bottom. That's what I'm looking at. And if I shift the center of this in the X direction, you'll see what this is going to do. It is going to just cycle it through, right? So this might be something that I want to, again, I may want it just to continuously go left or right, or I may want it to fluctuate back and forth. And again, because this is 2 values, it has a stopwatch. Those are things we can keyframe, but there are also things that we could write expressions for. And you'll find the more I'm not going to say the more better ones because that's not the correct wording. More better. We'll just say more better because I can't think of the word. The more better motion graphics people will rely on all the tools that they can get their hands on. So even though expressions may sound scary to you, it gets less scary the more you play with them, okay? So I'm going to alt-click on this. I'm going to...
I think you were looking for experience.
Yes, more experience. Thank you. I can utilize the same kind of expression that I already wrote, okay? So instead of scale, in this case, I'm going to use position. So position X, that's what I actually want to move left and right. I'm going to use that as a wiggle. And I'm going to maybe wiggle it every 3 seconds. Because this is a big thing, I don't want it to like jump around. I want it to be nice and fluid. Again, kind of understanding where our areas are that we want to connect things. And then I'm going to go with maybe 300 here, okay? Because this is offset and I started my start of this and the end of this look exactly the same, it could literally go on forever. So 300 should be a good number. And I need to set this to be the first value of that. And then position Y is just going to be whatever the position Y was. We'll figure out that. I'll just put position Y there, okay? And then we'll have this say position X, position Y. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to alt-click on that and paste it. And then, bless you, where this says position Y, I'm just going to drag this to position Y. Okay, and that'll type in the exact name, effect, offset, shift center to 1. So now when I hit play, there it goes. That's going way too quick. So let's make this 10. Oops, sorry, wrong way. 0.5, that's what I wanted to go, the other way. Yes, maybe even 0.2. Yep, it's just nice and subtle, that's all it is, okay? When you get further into this, you want to think about the big picture. Sometimes you would have stuff that would warrant these things going faster. If these things are animated, and let's say this top thing is like spinning like crazy, that bottom one may be going crazy. So at some point I may want to tie in a rotation here with how fast that's going. And again, the more experienced ones will actually learn how to use that so they can tie all these things together, okay? Now I'm just going to take this expression. Actually, I'm going to take this whole effect, this whole offset here. I'm going to go to my ruler top and just paste it. And because, come on, there we go. Because the offset is named the exact same thing, I don't need to tweak anything. It just works. Now what you'll find too is that because wiggle is such a random thing, we're getting different values. The top and the bottom are actually moving at different rates. So again, that might be something I want. I want them to move at different rates, or I may want them to be tied together, okay? If I decided, let's say I wanted to have them work in conjunction, they both move exactly the same, both left and right at the same time. Right now you can see the top one is moving pretty quick to the left. Now the bottom one's moving slow. Now this one's going pretty fast to the right. This one's moving to the right. So right now they're not in sync. They're actually moving completely different. I'm just going to cut this expression. I will get it later. If I wanted them to be exact, I could just pick whip this one to that one. And now they'll move exactly the same. So they're both moving to the left, and now they're both moving to the right. Okay? If I wanted them to move opposite, I just multiply this one times -1. Why? If I want it to move opposite, it'll move negative. Okay? So that way, as one's moving to the right, the other one's moving to the left, and vice versa. But they're always in sync. When one moves, the other one's moving, the exact same speed and everything. Okay? So just stuff to consider. There's no right way to do this. It's just a matter of what is going to look good. Okay? I'm going to take this 0.2 here and maybe make it 1. Yep, that's way too much. I think 0.3. There we go. Okay. So now before I exit this composition and go into the other one and start showing you how to link the other layers together, making it 3D, I have a lot of these valuables that I may want to change. As I start to get into it, I'm like, okay, I want this to be more random or faster or anything like that. I may need to tweak these values. And that would mean going into each one of these areas here. There we go. Looking at their expressions and then tweaking the expressions from here. Especially when I typed in that 0.85 on each one of these. That's like it's not a huge issue, but it is a hassle to have to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into UI3, and I'm going to make a new null object here. I'm going to call this controller. And then what I'm going to do is under the effects, I'm going to go to my expression controls, and I'm going to add a slider for all the things that I want to add controllers for. Okay? So I'm going to hit this lock, because if I click on this layer, it goes away. Okay? Or that comp. So I'm going to hit the lock so that when I go to that comp, it doesn't go away. So I'm going to call this one thin strips. I'm going to duplicate it, and I'll call this one radar ruler movement. Okay? I can do this for a bunch of them. I'm just going to do it for 2 for now. So what I'm going to do is instead of multiplying this times 0.8, I'm going to delete the 0.8 and drag this to my thin strip slider. So I'm going to delete the 0.85, drag this to the thin strip slider. Now again, because this is the same expression, I can just copy that and paste it to each one of these. Okay, now the purpose of that is if I hit play now, you'll see that there's nothing happening right here. This is set to 0, so all of them will be multiplied times 0, and they're going to nothing. If I set it to 0.5, there they are. I set it to 0.8, there they are. And I'm tweaking all of these across the board at the same time without having to go into each one of them and tweak them all manually. The same thing for my radar controls, or my rulers. I'm going to hit my expressions, and instead of multiplying this times 0.3 here, I'm just going to pick whip to my ruler movement. So now this is going to go 0 times a second, which means it won't move. If I set it to 10, it's going to go crazy. If I set it to 2, or 1, or 0.25. So I have a lot more control over this now than I did a minute ago. Because now I can be in this composition. Let me turn it on so we can see it. And I can tweak all of these settings. So I can say, oh, there's my ruler at the bottom is going too fast. Let's slow it down. There's my bars. They're going up too high. Let me lower those bars. Okay? So these are the things that you want to be able to add to your stuff. All right. So that's cool. All right. Now for the next area here of how we're going to start animating these. I'm going to turn off all of these ones. And I'm just going to focus on the green ones for now. Because the green ones are just like little ones. The same process applies to any of them. There we go. Okay, so in order for these things to be 3D, I have to click a button, this 3D button. Right? So now everything is in 3D. I also want to create a relationship between all of these items so that if one were to move, the ones above it should also, or the ones below it would also move, right? So this base one here that's at the very bottom, I'll verify, nope, that's not the right one. This one, nope. 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 There it is. Okay, so this green outer ring here, that should be at the bottom, so let's move that down. When this one moves up, all those other pieces should be moving up with it. It's kind of like the foundation of all that controller area. So I'm going to take this one, and this one will be my main one. Then I'm going to just turn that off for a second. And then I'm going to look for the other teeth one, which is this one. Nope. That one. It's hard when they're all like teeth rings. There it is. I clicked on that one, I thought. Okay, so that one. Yep, those two are good. That one's good, that one's good, and that one's good. Okay, so now these are in some sort of order. So I'm going to start at the top here, and this one is going to be parented to the one above it. This one will be parented to the one above that. This one will be parented to the one above that. This one to the one above that. This one to the one above that. And then this one to the one above that one. Okay? Now, as I go into this and I grab this one, and let's say that I rotate it, you'll see that all of them are rotating together. Okay? As I go into, let's say, all their rotations, and I start rotating all of them, you'll see how they can all rotate individually, but also they're rotating together. Okay? So I can rotate just those pieces, or these pieces, or whatever. Now, I do have to be aware that some of these pivots may not be in the right spot. If I rotate this one in the X direction, or the Z direction, that looks like it's rotating pretty seamlessly, perfectly circular. If I go to the next one and rotate it, that one doesn't really see anything. We're not seeing any rotation here because this is basically just a green bar. We're not going to see any rotation on that one. So it's not really a purpose of rotating just that one, but you'll see where I'm getting to in a second. The next one looks like it's rotating fine. Let's go to the next one. There we go. So this one you can see is definitely off. That's not rotating the correct way. If I look at where the pivot is for this one, you can see it's right here. So I need to make sure that all of these are lined up exactly there. So I'm going to drag in some rulers. So close. There we go. I'm going to make sure I go to my teeth here and drag this so that it's centered. Now there's no snap for this. It's just we have to move it. Or did it snap? Let's see. Oh, it did snap. Okay. So if I hold Control and drag the center, there it goes. Snap right to that ruler. Good. Let's double check this one. Good. Double check this one. Good. And double check the end one. Good. Okay, so now everything is working correctly. The ones that don't have any rotation on them, or that doesn't look like there's any rotation, these solid rings, this one here, I'm basically going to just parent that to something else. Okay, I'm going to have basically like these two be part of the same object, because it doesn't matter, because they're all just moving the same. So I'm going to go to outer solid ring and just also parent this to the green outer ring. This solid ring here, again, I don't see anything moving with it, so I'll parent this also to the green teeth ring. These are arbitrary. I'm just parenting it to something else besides that. That way, as I take this and rotate it, that one does this. As I take number 5 and rotate it, that one does that. This one I would never really animate or rotate this way. Okay, that's the solid ring. It's just not going to do anything. I might rotate it this way or that way, but not the other way. Okay, and then there's that one. That's good too. Okay. So now that all of these are connected, I want to have this main one attached to a null also. I'll make it 3D. Call this one green rings. Make sure it's positioned in the correct spot, so it should be centered right here. And then make sure that this is below that. Oops, too far. Make sure this is parented to green rings. Yes. And now when I rotate this, perfect. Cool. All right, so now I've basically set up how those rings can move. If I look at their positions, you'll see that their X and Y positions are going to be very different, but their Z position is all going to be the same. They're all 0, meaning that their depth is all exactly the same. I'm going to go to this top one here, and I'm going to leave the position as is, go to the next one. I'm going to alt-click it, and I'm going to do just a little setup here that says that it's going to be linked to the one above it. I have to delete that. Okay. Instead of position X, I'm just going to do PX. And instead of saying green center black, I'm just going to do that index -1. Oops. And then remember the X and Y, I actually don't want to touch the X and Y position. I want to keep those exactly where they're at. So I'm just going to say U equal exactly what you were before. Okay, so don't change the X and Y. That's what this is saying. Oops, I typed in Y there. I want to type 1 and 2. This one will grab the Z position from the one above it. And then I'm going to multiply it times 0.8. Yes. And then here, PX, PY, and PZ. Copy it. Paste it. We have an error, so we click there, and it says position of layer 3 in comp 3 expected, semicolon. I forgot a period there. There we go. So now I'm going to take this and I'm going to copy this and paste it on the other ones. Cool. All right, so now I have my regular position. So if I want to move everything here, I can move it just with that null. If I want to rotate everything, I can rotate it just with that null. But now watch what happens when I rotate it like this. Then I go up to my very top one, that center one, and I start moving that Z position.
Okay, that looks so cool.
Right? Because now all these things are related to each other. You could go through, if you wanted to, and manually move each one of these things and animate each one, but that's a lot simpler, right? It makes it a lot easier for us to be able to go through and tweak what that's looking like just based on that. So when my character goes and he says, you know, pull this out or whatever, the whole thing will expand. Everything will still be rotating and whatever, but everything will expand. Okay, so I would go through and just start doing that same kind of thing to all of the other layers. Anything that's relating to each other, that's what I want to keep in mind, is how they're all relating to each other. Oops, wrong button. And then what I can do to kind of speed up how they're connected. So I have my green ring here. Just set that aside. I have these black rings in the center. Those would all be part of that same cluster. I also have these rings over here. Those would all be part of their own little clusters. Same thing here, same thing there, same thing here. These ones I use a wiggle on the rotation. So the rotations of them just wiggle. That's all they need to do. Same thing on this side. I make sure I have this selected. I go to my rotation. That's the Z direction, I believe. I'll double check, yes. I just alt-click, wiggle. How many times do I want this to wiggle each second? Let's say 1, and there's a 90-degree rotation. Okay, so again, I go through and I do all that stuff to make sure that my animation is easier. Now at this point, I'm not actually animating anything, I'm just setting it up to be animated, okay? That way when I get to the part where I'm like, okay, what do I want this to do? I have maybe 5 different items that I'm keyframing versus trying to keyframe every single one of these layers. Okay? So think about ways that you could do this kind of thing to yours and then do them. Next week I'll go through how do you actually then animate this? How do you attach this to something and make everything kind of work so that it feels like everything is part of an actual user interface? Okay?
So basically we're thinking of ways and we're like practicing to see if they'll work even after it works.
Right. And then connecting things together, parenting things, making little expressions to connect them together. Mm-hmm.
Okay, about the base items, is that the stuff that's not going to be like rotating or
Basically, I'm going to have a flat area like this. Let me grab everything so you can see it. Oops, I don't need everything. Just want to grab a new null. So this will be everything. Okay, now I'm going to undo this at some point, but for now it'll work. So I'm going to grab everything else, and I'm going to parent everything else to that everything layer. And that way, as my scene evolves and I say, okay, I want to take this and actually like make it a user interface. I want to put it onto a desk that my person can interact with. All I have to do is rotate it. There we go. Now it's a desk. My actor comes up and he's like clicking on buttons. He moves his hand up. Oops, let me open up my ones here so I can see them. And now that comes up. Okay? And at that same time, because everything is still there, you can see how everything is still moving. Once I have something like this, if I shoot a video and I have my person standing in front of a table, I just literally put it on the table. I just match up the perspectives of my scene and this thing, and it's now on the table. So my actor is just doing this kind of thing, moving his hand around, and I can control all of that stuff.
why did you put bars moving in the base item?
These ones here, or those? Because I didn't see a need to have them pop up. Now, you might in yours say, hey, I do want those to pop up. That's fine.
Things that pop up go in the...
Right, things I would want more 3D, I would put inside a separate area or just manipulate them separately. Even these things here, even though they're part of this, that they just kind of like floated up, they're still part of this green rings. So if I decided I could rotate the entire thing towards the camera, and I have to stop playing it so it will interact faster, move this entire thing straight up, and allow my person to interact with that individually. So now it's actually like a 3D item that's like floating in space. Okay? It all depends on your goal of what you want to happen and how you want these things to move around. We talked about in some cases you may have, I said before you should have 3 of these. You may want one of your buttons that you would highlight, like they would click on it, and then another menu pops up, right? So you can have pieces fly out the side. It's all in just how the interface is going to function. And obviously that's something you have to think about as you're building it, because how else are you going to animate it? If you just build a bunch of random shapes and you have no idea how it's going to animate, that only gets you to the design part. That doesn't get you to the actual like animation part, which is obviously the end goal of this. That's why one of the things I told you to do was go through, not there, under here, and look at different interfaces. Look at different ways that you could have things interact. And it's too much stuff. There we go. So some things are going to animate differently. This stuff down here, I may want those little dots just to kind of move around, right? That might be something that I decided that I wanted to do. These 3 shapes here, they may kind of flicker into place. Same thing with these dials here. Those might stay there or they might spin. As something pops up, those things might spin or whatever. These numbers on the side, they might rotate. There might be a glow happening on this. It all depends again on how you want these things to flow, how you want to move them around. There might be a lot of 3D stuff on that one. The bar chart is kind of weird. You'll see these, they're all over the place. You know, if you do one, you set that one up, it's very easy just to copy that animation to the other ones. Even though my ruler goes all the way to the end, that same trick can be done to this one, to move and offset that. Here's a gradient just on top of some bars. The 3D thing, this is probably actually like a 3D item, so ignore that. This is exactly like my green teeth. It's just they're above it, and then these ones down here are below it. These little lines that are here, that might be using the write-on effect, right, that we went through with the text. Oops. Let's see, more bars, more bars. These dots might just kind of flicker into place. They may just like kind of like ramp up to opacity and then twinkle back down. Ramp up to opacity and then twinkle back down. Okay? So look at different videos. Look at different interfaces. Analyze how each piece is either going to move or it's going to be a base item or it's going to do whatever. Okay? That's the only way that you're going to understand how to animate the stuff is if you understand how you want to animate it. And at the very least, you're setting keyframes and doing like the ping pong thing so it goes back and forth. Or you're doing a wiggle expression. Or you're Googling specific things about how you can do different expressions and get different things to do.